All right, we're going to pick up in the book of Joshua chapter 3 this morning. Joshua chapter 3. And we're going to discuss how they crossed the Jordan River. Of course, just remembering everything that has happened up to this point, the Lord gave a charge to Joshua in chapter 1 that he must be strong and courageous and be careful to do everything that is written in the Lord's law. And in response, the Lord would give him success and prosper him and would allow him and the nation of Israel to conquer the land of Canaan. And of course, Joshua passes these commands on to the leaders of the people. And he tells them in verses 10 and 11 of chapter 1 that you must pass through the midst of the people and command them, saying, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you are going to cross this Jordan, to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you, to possess it. Now, of course, chapter 2, we had kind of a side which took us away from Joshua and over to the other side of the Jordan to show us what the spies were doing that Joshua sent over. And we learned that the spies encountered Rahab, and that Rahab helped the spies. In return, they're going to spare her life, providing she does everything they tell them. And now we come to chapter 3 and chapter 4. Really, the two chapters together are devoted to the crossing of the Jordan. And, why would the crossing of the Jordan have been so notable? Well, a large chunk of that has to do with the fact that this is going on at the end of the wet season. And the Jordan River would have been about maybe 12 to 15 deep at this point. Sometimes it's shallow enough to cross, but at this time of year it wasn't. And so the Canaanites, they know that Israel's on the other side of the Jordan, and they know that they're, probably planning to come over, but they think maybe we have a little time left. Maybe we can escape destruction for just a little while longer, because they can't possibly cross over the Jordan in this climate. And then, lo and behold, everybody is on the other side of the Jordan. Now, fear is struck into the hearts of the land's inhabitants. Because what happens here should not have been able to happen, but it happened anyway because God divided the waters of the Jordan. Let's begin reading. I'll read the first 13 verses of chapter 3. It says, Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. However, there shall be between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Then Joshua said to the people, Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, Take up the ark of the covenant and cross over ahead of the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went ahead of the people. Now the Lord said to Joshua, This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. You shall moreover command the priests who are carrying the ark of the covenant, saying, When you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. Then Joshua said to the sons of Israel, Come here, and hear the words of the Lord your God. Joshua said, By this you shall know that the living God is among you, that he will assuredly dispossess from before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over ahead of you into the Jordan. Now then, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man for each tribe. And it shall come about, when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord, the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan will be cut off, and the waters which are flowing down from above will stand in one heap. All right. There's a couple things we'll notice here. First of all, the comment in verse 2 is at the end of 3 days, the officers go through the midst of the camp. That reminds us of those instructions back in chapter 1 in verses 10 and 11. Joshua told the people that we're going to cross over in 3 days, and that they must consecrate themselves. Secondly, anybody notice an object that's mentioned repeatedly in this chapter? almost disproportionately compared to everything else we see? I'm sorry? The Ark of the Covenant, that's right. The Ark of the Covenant is actually mentioned 17 times in these two chapters. And you think about it, how many times in the Bible does the Ark of the Covenant mention explicitly in a narrative? It's not that many, proportionally speaking. And 17 times in one area suggests that the Ark has some importance to this story. But why? What was the Ark for? What was it? Okay, it was you're referring to the mercy seat that sat on top of it. Whenever Aaron would enter the most holy place, the Lord would appear in a cloud above the mercy seat. So there is a kind of a symbolism of God's throne there. Good. What else? Okay, it held things to... Right, and the Hebrew author talks about the three things that were contained in the Ark of the Covenant. The jar of manna, the 2 tablets of stone from Mount Sinai, and Aaron's rod that had budded. And so that's another important thing. Good. What else? What else was the Ark used? What was the Ark used for?
Often they used it to...
They did. Yeah.
The priest.
Right, yes. Numbers 3 and 4, the priests carry it when they're moving it from place to place. In Numbers 10, when they move the ark for the first time, Moses makes a comment. He says in verses 35 and 36, "Rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you." And when it came to rest, he said, "Return, O Lord, to the myriad thousands of Israel." And that's references to the moving of the ark. Don, you have something?
You asked a question.
Okay. Right. And I think James is onto something when he talks about it being used in battle. Keith, did you have something?
Well, during the time of Moses, God himself led the people in the wilderness, pillar of fire.
Right.
Now follow after. Now that they're going to be led by
Okay, so the ark is a symbol of God's presence, ultimately. And that's one thing that's important. Whenever the ark was moved into the tabernacle, the glory of the Lord filled that tabernacle. Whenever the ark was moved into the temple, the glory of the Lord filled that temple. When they built Ezra's temple, the temple in the days of Zerubbabel and Ezra, no ark was there. And there's no description of the glory of the Lord inhabiting that temple either. It was an empty temple. But here, the Ark of the Covenant is, I think, the connection with it being used in battle is important. Of course, we can think of the negative example in 1 Samuel chapter 4, wherever Israel gets routed by the Philistines, and somebody says, well, it's because the Lord wasn't with us. Let's go get the Ark. They go get the Ark, and what happens? The Philistines capture the Ark, and the Lord is there, but He defeats them, is what happens. But there are other instances where it appears in battle. For instance, in 2 Samuel chapter 11, whenever David is trying to convince Uriah the Hittite to go into his wife, you'll note the comment that Uriah makes in here it is, in verse 11, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in temporary shelters, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? By your life and the life of your soul I will not do this thing." Oh, yeah.
When that was instituted, they told them, there I will speak with you, and I will
Okay, yeah.
between the two cherubims. So really it was sort of a connection.
Yeah, it's like a radio for talking to God. It's the whole idea. Yes, it was the place where the priests would go to inquire of the Lord. They would take the Urim and the Thummim, and they would inquire of the Lord using those. Urim and Thummim were also missing from the second temple that was built. But So, it's just various links between humanity and God were severed in the Second Temple period. But what we have here, yes, is this, the Ark of the Covenant crosses over the Jordan for them. And so when the Ark of the Covenant crossed the Jordan, what were they supposed to do? Were they supposed to, get up alongside it, look at it, touch it, that kind of thing? Is that what they were supposed to do? No? What were they supposed to do?
They were supposed to stay
2,000 cubits, which is about 1,000 yards, or 3,000 feet, or however you want to render that. If I'm not in India anymore, so I don't have to do metric conversions. Thank goodness. But if the ark is a symbol of God's presence, the people need to keep their distance. Don't get too close. Don't touch the ark. Don't look at the ark. If you do that, you're in trouble. In fact, would they have been able to see the actual ark when this was going on? No, not just because of the distance. What else? Yeah, they usually covered it. When they moved it in Numbers chapters 3 and, in Numbers chapter 4 in verses 5 through 6, it talks about how the priests, before anything else was happened, and they started moving all the tabernacle equipment, it says that the priests were supposed to take down the veil of the screen and cover the ark of the testimony with it. They shall lay a covering of porpoise skin on it, and they shall spread over it a cloth of pure blue and insert its poles. So you would have been able to tell what the ark was by the big blue cloth on top of it, but you wouldn't have been able to see the ark itself. Almost nobody ever got to see the ark. Which, think about it, the glorious gold box that nobody can see. James, do you have something?
I was just going to say, they have to be able to see it. Obviously, they won't be seeing the actual gold,
right,
but they'll see the presence of it.
Right, they'll see the big blue cloth. That's kind of the signal that the ark's under this thing. But they don't see the ark itself. There's an interesting point. And in verse 15 it says that when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the holy objects and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, when the camp is to set out, after that the sons of Kohath shall come in to carry them, so they will not touch the holy objects and die. These are the things in the tent of meeting which the sons of Kohath are to carry. You don't touch the Ark of the Covenant. You don't touch the holy objects. Because what will happen if you touch them? You will die. Yes, it's not big high voltage sign we could put. There are some other parallels to God's appearance at Mount Sinai here. The 3 days of preparation that Joshua tells them to make, for instance, in Exodus 19, it said that they were supposed to wait 3 days before the Lord Himself descended on Mount Sinai and spoke to them in the pillar of fire. You'll notice at Mount Sinai, was Israel allowed to go on Mount Sinai? No. Why? What would happen if they went up? If they touched the mountain? What would happen if a beast touched the mountain? It would die. It would be even if a beast touched the mountain, it would be stoned to death. All right. Consecrate yourselves. That comment in verse 5 that you must consecrate yourselves. It's what the people had to do before the appearance of the Lord on the mountain. And the Lord will perform wonders among you. There's kind of this reminder of the general Exodus experience that the Lord would perform miraculous signs in their presence. They would see something marvelous that day. They would see the glory of God manifested in that day. And then in verse 7 it says that the Lord tells Joshua, I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel. What does that mean? Why is God going to exalt Joshua? What would that even entail? Don.
Rest of the verse, it says that they know the different
That's right. We saw this earlier, didn't we? In Joshua chapter 1. In Joshua chapter 1, there was this comment at the very beginning of the chapter, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died, and the Lord speaks to Joshua, the servant of Moses. It's Joshua is kind of described almost in second-class terms there. But the Lord also tells Joshua, just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. And the people tell Joshua in chapter 1, at the end of the chapter, that just as we obeyed Moses, well, when you obeyed Moses, we will obey you as well. Only may the Lord your God be with you as He was with Moses. Chapter 1 and verse 17. And, so you have this idea that, Joshua is being exalted a little bit to be put back into this position. And by the end of the book, he is called the servant of the Lord, just like Moses was. In chapter 24 and verse 29. So that by the time God is finished exalting Joshua, Joshua is called the servant of the Lord. Yes.
There's always some concern.
Right.
Leadership anywhere. There's confidence that has to be built in God. Confidence to the people.
Yes. That's another good point that can be made. Is that it's Moses is dead. What are we going to do without Moses? You got that epitaph at the end of Deuteronomy 34 that since that time there hasn't been a prophet like Moses. What about Joshua? Is he going to be the leader that we need him to be, like Moses was? Can we trust this guy? Is the Lord really going to be with him? And the Lord affirms in every way throughout the book that yes, He is with Joshua, just as the Lord was with Moses. But what is particularly unique about this event right here that connects him to Moses? This scene right here where they're crossing the Jordan. Moses parted the Red Sea. Okay. What important Old Testament event should we be reminded of when we read the Jordan River crossing? Hey, this sounds a lot like the Red Sea crossing. We're supposed to see that. We're supposed to see the similarity between the two. You'll notice that this title, the Lord of all the earth, appears twice in Joshua's instructions to the people. The Ark of the Lord of all the earth, verse 13. The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth, in verse 11. What does that mean, Lord of all the earth? It actually kind of has a double meaning to it. Okay, He has a supremacy to Him. On the one hand, earth sometimes just means land, and it's just a reference to, He's the Lord of all the land of what we're about to go into, right?
It could also be
Yeah, and then that's the other side of it, is Lord of all the earth. We think of, and I guess we're more equipped to think of that than the Hebrews would have been, because we think earth, we think planet earth, everything, around it. So on one hand, Israel could go, Lord of all the land of Canaan, what? No, but not just that. The Lord of all the earth. God is ruler of all lands and encompasses what we would understand to be all the world. Any comments or questions up through verse 13? I want to go a little further with the crossing proper. Okay. Verse 14, when the people sent out from their tents to cross the Jordan with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and when those who carried the Ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the Ark were dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks all the days of harvest, the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great distance away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. And those who were flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. So the people crossed opposite Jericho. And the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on the dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan. And again, a lot of the same language from the story of the Red Sea crossing. The waters pile up like a heap. You might think of Exodus 15 and verse 8, where the deeps congealed in the hearts of the sea. There's some rabbinic tradition out there that describes the Red Sea as actually turning into glass or something so the people can cross it. I don't know about that. And Psalm 114 is a short little psalm that describes the crossing of the sea and the crossing of the Jordan, but it just kind of alternates back and forth between them with each line, which I think says that, we're supposed to connect the two events again. In verse 1 of Psalm 114, when Israel went forth from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange language, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled, the Jordan turned back, the mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. What ails you, O sea, that you flee? O Jordan, that you turn back? O mountains, that you skip like rams? O hills like lambs? Tremble, O earth, before the Lord, before the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a fountain of water. What was it that caused the sea to turn back? What was it that caused the Jordan to flee? Why would they do that? Because of the Lord of all the earth. Therefore, all the earth should tremble before Him, according to that psalm. So there's there's this connection between them. But let's go further than that. What does dividing of waters remind us of anything else? Any other significant event? Yes, Don? The flood? Okay, were waters divided in the flood? Actually, they came kind of crashing together in the flood. It was almost a backwards event. But yes, you're right there. The death of Christ. Why does it remind us of the death of Christ? I think there might be some connection there. I have to think about that one. But there probably is something to the idea of the imagery of water in the Bible in general. I was actually trying to think further back in the past first before we went into the future, but we're going to jump to the New Testament in a second and make an application. So, okay, yeah, Don pointed out the flood. Is there any other instance in the Bible where God divides waters? In the beginning, okay, second day of creation, Genesis 1 and verses 6 through 8. The Lord says, let there be a separation of waters from waters, and let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. And it was so. And just as God divided waters to create the world, God divides waters to create the nation of Israel. There is a sort of creation story going on in the Red Sea crossing and in the Jordan River crossing. God divides waters. He removes the barrier to bring His people to Himself. Now, anytime people come closer to God, they have to pass through water. That's why there's a big water basin outside the tabernacle, is because, it's the washing basin. The priests would wash in it. And, baptism, yes, good. It was in 1 Peter chapter 3, Peter draws the connection with the flood, but it's the same idea, all the same, that baptism saves you, not the removal of dirt from flesh. It's not some magical property in the water itself, but because because the act is an appeal to God for good conscience that corresponds to Noah being saved through water. James.
Maybe an interesting way to look at it is the dividing of the Red Sea. And they were all clean.
That'd be interesting. It would be a washing away. Of course, the problem with Israel is that, a lot of the bad people went through the water too, and then they get in the wilderness, and, they all die in the which there's something to that, though, too. It says that, people who have been saved in the sense that they've escaped slavery and they've escaped through the waters, they passed through it, they're part of God's covenant people. Those same people can in turn be rejected from inheriting the final promise. There's an important lesson in that as well, one that the New Testament appropriates on multiple occasions. And of course, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 draws another connection here. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul describes the crossing of the Red Sea as a baptism of sorts. He says, I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. So there is of course, Paul goes on to say that Israel's spiritual food and drink and Israel's baptism didn't protect them from the consequences of their idolatry. And he warns them in the context of 1 Corinthians 10 that, just as your experience is common to Israel, your temptation is common to Israel as well. No temptation is overtaking you that's particularly unique, but such as is common to man. But God is also, just as He provided Israel a way of escape, He provides you a way of escape as well. So the question is whether or not you will take it. Will you be like Israel, that succumb to idolatry, or will you be different from Israel in that respect? There a couple of other things back to Joshua 3. Some word plays here and there. The waters stood as long as the priests stood in the midst of the Jordan, verses 16 and 17. Another one, the waters were completely cut off in verse 16 until the people completely crossed in verse 17. But after they finished doing that, there's another element to this story that we're going to see in chapter 4. So any comments or questions up to verse 17 before I quickly jump into chapter 4? Yeah, there's a lot more in...
Tribes, they didn't have
Yeah.
Moses, you have the free
Yeah, well, they got the covenant and the tabernacle between then and now. It's interesting, when they crossed the Red Sea, they were fleeing from an army, and that army was destroyed in the crossing. Here, they're not fleeing from anybody, they're actually coming upon an army to besiege them. They're coming as an army to besiege these various cities. So, the one crossing of waters has definitely reversed the roles a little bit over 40 years, I think. But yeah, there's a lot of differences between those, and I gotta think a little more and just kind of pick the differences apart on this. But the Lord's represented by the ark instead of the pillar of cloud. But in general, the same point is made that God is the one who does this. Man does not. By man's devices, Israel's staying on that side of the Jordan. They're not fording that river, but here they are able to all cross over because of the power of the Lord. Now, in chapter 4. When all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from each tribe. Command them, saying, Take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight." So Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, 1 man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Cross again to the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. And each of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel. Let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall say to them, 'Because of the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it crossed the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever.' Thus the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Israel, and they carried them over with them to the lodging place and put them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. For the priests who carried the ark were standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people hurried and crossed. And when all the people had finished crossing, the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed before the people. The sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over in the battle array before the sons of Israel, just as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 equipped for war crossed for battle before the Lord to the desert plains of Jericho. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel. so that they revered him just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. Now the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony that they come up from the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests, saying, "Come up from the Jordan." It came about when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and went over all its banks as before. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. He said to the sons of Israel, "When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, 'What are these stones?' then you shall inform your children, saying, 'Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground.' For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed. That all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever." All right. Now, a good chunk of this chapter is devoted to this building of a monument. What's the point of the monument? What is it for? For God.
And it's also for
Remembrance.
their posterity.
All right.
They typically did that after
Altar, building altars. This isn't necessarily an altar, but it is a monument of stones, and it's constructed similarly to how an altar is built. The 12 men collected 12 stones from the Jordan. They bring them to the lodging place, and these stones form a monument at Gilgal. And the motivation for this monument is explicitly stated in verses 6 and 7, and in verses 23 and 24, or 21 through 24. It's a teaching tool for their children. He says, in times to come, your children are going to look at this monument and they're going to say, "What is this? What is the meaning of this?" And that is the point at which you say, well, this is remind us about the time that the Lord parted the waters of the Jordan before us and allowed us to cross over. And those reminders are necessary for God's people. God seems to think they're necessary. So there we have this image here. The monument was meant to prompt questions from future generations. And those future questions were supposed to be a teaching opportunity for children. It wasn't a conversation about, why is that monument of stones there, Mommy and Daddy? Because God said to put it there. No, you were supposed to explain it to them and tell them the story behind it. Don. Yes, that's right. There is a memorial. The idea of remembrance is important for God's people, as always. And it's still important, even now.
I think crossing that Jordan has been one of those. Every single person. Now they knew.
Life-changing.
That was intentional on God's part.
That life-changing, right? Of course, the thing about life-changing event, and I'm going to talk more about this in the Sunday night sermon, about how, the Israel that came out of Egypt, the rebellious Israel had seen so many things that none of us will ever see, ever really get a grasp on. And yet they were the most stubborn, rebellious people in the world. You would think that would change you. You would think that would change us. But humans are prone to forgetfulness. And that's why the memorial is necessary. That's why the remembrance is necessary. It's one thing to walk by the Ark of the Covenant, which should have been an awe-inspiring event that would have changed your life forever. But it's, what about the next generation? What about the generation after that? Well, there has to be some kind of thing in place to remind them of that. Another comment, how many monuments are actually being set up here? It's the one. Well, what do we do with verse 9? Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant were standing. Huh?
that became underwater.
An underwater monument. Yeah, well, apparently. There is, now to be fair, there is a way to translate that where it says Joshua set up 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan. I mean, does anybody even have that in the version they're reading? I'm wondering, that's...
Oh, that's what it says.
No, that's a proposed emendation. I don't know.
Where their feet were.
Right where their feet were. So apparently there was a second monument. There appears to have been a second monument built in this chapter.
Still there.
And is still there to this day. That phrase, by the way, to this day, appears more times in the book of Joshua than any other book of the Bible. It's just random little tidbit there. It's 15 times in the book of Joshua. And it's always various events. The city's been torn down, and it's that way to this day. The Canaanites live in this area to this day. Obviously, it's not talking about this day here in 2014. It's talking about whenever the book of Joshua was written to this day.
It showed the fulfillment of all the promises.
Right.
Made that
Yeah.
happened. It was like that.
Yeah, I mean, it did, and I mean, I think that, this statement, it doesn't give us a data on exactly when the book was written. It just tells us that, somebody after the fact was able to look back and say, and it's the same way right now. You can go and see it for yourself to this day. It's kind of almost an invitation, go check out the monument for yourself, which, in a world where people want to kind of dispute the historicity of all this, it's interesting to see that, this book is claiming, no, these things really happened. You can go see it. The monument's still there. So then those are kind of some important claims that are being made on that point. Did I see a hand? Okay. What else? Okay, so they set up the monument in the middle of the Jordan, and they set up the second monument at Gilgal. And I don't know who the monument underwater is for, but maybe the top of it would have been visible during the dry season. I couldn't tell you. But the priest stood in the middle of the Jordan until, verse 10, everything that the Lord had commanded, everything that Moses had commanded Joshua had happened. And in verse 14 it says that the Lord exalted Joshua that day, like He promised to do in verse 7 of chapter 3. And as soon as the priests exit the waters come back to their place. Everything returns to normal in the Jordan River. In verses 15 through 18. Here we go. Oh, okay, yes. In verse 19, they came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month. Now, does that date mean anything to anyone here? It's like if I said December 25th to that audience, you know what December 25th is. You know what July 4th is. Well, what is 10th day of the first month? Because that's an instantly recognizable date to them. That is the day that in Exodus chapter 12 and verses 2 and 3 that they prepared for the Passover. Which, one of the first things they do after crossing the Jordan is they eat the Passover. So, yes, it's almost time for Passover. And they crossed the Jordan pretty close to the time of year that they would have crossed the Red Sea. Actually, this would have been a little before the Passover. For reference, the Passover is on the 14th day of the first month. So that's the season in which this is going on. It's important to realize that because we read the Bible and sometimes those dates are kind of, they get kind of lost on us because we don't follow the same calendar they do.
It was like March or April.
Yeah, it would have been about March or April. But they hear the phrase 10th day of the first month. They would have drawn the instant connection because it's part of their heritage. Just like I might say, July 4th, and you would draw an instant connection. I'm talking about a specific day that's relevant to our nation's history. 10th day of the first month is relevant to their history. They camp at Gilgal. The word Gilgal means circle, and the name for that's going to be explained when we read chapter 5. The stones are set up in verses 21 and 22. The explanation is given. But then there's another comment made at the very end of the chapter. Not just that Israel may know, but, verse 24, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. And so the reason for this monument, the reason for the Jordan crossing, isn't just to impress Israel, but to impress all the nations, to remind them that there is a God who rules the earth and who can do these things. Maybe even a last-ditch effort to try to get some of them to repent and change their ways. Who knows? But at any point, we see the result in chapter 5 and verse 1, that it came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, their hearts melted. There was no longer any spirit in them because of the sons of Israel. The writing on the wall, another biblical reference to judgment. Daniel 5. So why the crossing of the Jordan? Well, for God to exalt Moses, to God to exalt Joshua as He had exalted Moses, so that all the nations will know and fear Yahweh, so that all Israel will know that God is with them, and so that Israel will have something to teach future generations after the fact. That's the Jordan River crossing. We got through 2 chapters today. Any comments or questions up to this point? All right.
An awesome God.
Yeah. Amen to that. We'll see. We'll get to chapter 5 next time, and who knows? We might even knock over Jericho. We'll see.